Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast.
This is Chris, writer for the site and subtitle editor.
This is Eric, teacher, sometimes writer.
And I am Dimitri, editor-in-chief of Idiomatic.com and movie critic. And we've reached the point in our year-long project now, a little bit longer than a year.
Yeah, thereabout, huh?
Yeah. Where we've
Not
reached...
that it was a difficult project, we just can't coordinate.
Pretty much. We've reached the 50s. For those of you who haven't been following, we've been going down the decades, listing our top 3 movies of each of those decades, and we've reached the last decade where we'll be doing that. Because after that, we'll do a special series of episodes about the rest.
Yeah.
But the 50s is the last decade we're doing. But the reason why we're stopping is, I think it's because the 50s, just sort of, reached that point where we're like, hey, we're just listing classics now.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what's going on.
Yeah, it's not like we're going down in any type of rabbit hole of, look how cool I am, I know this movie. It's just like, no, they're classics and you know them and you like them for a reason. This is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Although that might be a little bit of the 50s, though. By that point, the Hollywood machine had sort of cemented itself in terms of formula. Musicals were popping out all the time, and it was a very formulated decade for cinema. And that might be a little bit of the reason why we're
Well, you've got an entire generation returning from a war, and the advent of a little bit more of that suburban culture, so to speak, and part of that was, your weekend going out to the movies, and certainly Hollywood was right there giving you something to watch, So, and they did a good job. They turned it into a major industry. The 50s was also the time, the invention of the car, so it's the first time you've basically got, teenagers driving out on their own, so it's also the invention of the date movie.
Right.
So already, you've got this element of, the drive-in, the this, the that, and you really do see, pretty much a movie for every culture, every niche, in a way, And the other side of it is also just this sense of, the fear of the bomb. That really hung over that entire generation. So it's just there's this sense of unease and paranoia and violence that just might erupt anywhere, That I find, in a way, the noir tradition, whether it's the detective or not, almost kind of taps into that as well as just kind of this underscore of fear and, paranoia with the general population.
Without further ado, Eric, why don't you get us started?
Okay, so I'll start number 3 all the way to number 1. So number 3, Seventh Seal. The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman. It's in black and white, as most of the 50s movies are. It takes place during the Black Plague in Europe, and it's this man that's asking all these questions about life and death, and he's playing chess against the Grim Reaper. And it's kind of interesting because the Grim Reaper is right there, all in black with this very somber face. And at first he's kind of jokey, and then when we see him later on, he starts to become more and more menacing. I like Bergman a lot. I think the man was definitely a genius. And it's the movie that I always like more. I like Wild Strawberries. I like all of his films, but that one, I don't know why, there was a high energy. And when I read up on it, he said that was a fun movie he made during the summer with his friends. Oh. And you feel it. You definitely feel it when it's up on the screen, and it's kind of a dark thing too. Yeah. Having the Grim Reaper chase you. It was kind of like the prelude to Final Destination.
Right, Bill and Ted's. Actually, I didn't know that about the backstory there. So that's kind of interesting because it's a good movie for sure. But it's something that I've always thought of as these big moving parts, very allegorical.
Yeah.
And not terribly deep in a way. You know what I mean? It's just
sure.
But just kind of beautiful and interesting and really kind of enjoyable to watch. Meaning not deep in terms of I don't know what I mean by that, but it's just in terms of nuance. These are the parts. Everything's being given to you, and I think the black and white actually helps in this case. And the shadows and the silhouettes and everything. So you get this sense of the medieval paintings, and it all lends to that bigger than life feel to it. And it's a really good movie.
My second one would be Sunset Boulevard by Billy Wilder, which, interestingly enough, Chris, you're the one that gave me the copy of the film, and I watched it. And it's about this writer that basically has no money. Somebody's about to repossess his cars. The repo mans are after him, and his car breaks down. He goes into this weird place, this weird Sunset Boulevard there, and into this gigantic rundown house that looks like a weird museum. And he meets a very famous silent movie actress. And within this, just because he keeps chasing the money, he gets into this really weird, complex relationship with her. And she keeps saying that she's going to do her comeback and everything. Billy Wilder, who's known for he did some Like It Hot before that, and then he comes into with Sunset Boulevard, and it's such a blow to the Hollywood system. Like, it's very satirical, it's very Morton as a film, and it's brilliant. It has incredible lines throughout, and just the story itself, you get to feel something for this really crazy raging actress, but that had like her glory days, and all of a sudden like she kind of dwindles down. It's incredible, the complexity that you actually feel for a lot of these characters.
It's just such a great part in a way, and it always reminded me of The Great Gatsby, like that older woman who basically time stops, like when her husband leaves her or dies on the wedding night. I can't remember.
Gloria Swanson.
But basically, she's just like this weird crone surrounded in this house of, just basically mementos to this wedding that never happened. And here you've got this case of basically this woman who, time has kind of stopped. The world has moved on, but as long as she stays in this house, she can continue with this fantasy that, she is going to have this comeback. She will have this comeback. And if she steps out the door, then probably she'll be proven wrong, right?
And there's a lot of interesting things, too, because some of these actors, was it Eric von Stroheim, who plays the butler, was actually a very famous silent movie director. He actually directed Gloria Swanson, who used to be a huge star in the silent movies. And he directed her big flop, and they both hated each other, and then they buried the hatchet to make that film together. And Gloria Swanson was huge, so she was already a has-been when she made that movie. So there was a lot of, we're talking about postmodernism and everything else. This was one movie that said, here we go.
Yeah, she doesn't just look the part, she kind of is the part.
Exactly, and she's playing cards with Buster Keaton and all of these silent movie actors that are very well known, and this is all happening in 1950s, that kind of like The Expendable with all the action heroes that we see. We get the joke.
Except it doesn't suck.
Yeah, The Expendables should just stick to playing cards.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's a very creepy movie, has some very funny moments, but altogether just brilliant.
Yeah, no, it's a really good choice and a great gift of mine.
Yeah, it was, actually. One of the few.
On Glorious, standard definition DVD.
So, yeah, and my number one, and I've seen this film easily 10, 15 times, still love it. Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock.
I love that you qualify it as by Alfred Hitchcock, as opposed to The Rear Window, directed by Jerry Monsoli.
Well, if we're talking about Psycho, you would have to qualify it.
Exactly. And I'm glad to say they never needed to make a remake of it, just because it was brilliant.
Well, no, I think I've seen the remake of it. It was called Disturbia, and it starts Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah, I know, but that one was more teenagery, but no, this one is kind of like the perfect movie in a sense. We get Jimmy Stewart. That's he's stuck in a wheelchair, and he has no TV, obviously. So he has his binoculars, and he has like his camera because he's a photographer, and he keeps peeking at all of his neighbors. And he kind of makes up stories. And then there's one night he hears a scream and he imagines that one of his neighbors killed somebody and he becomes obsessed with it. And he's sure that he killed him, and he kind of ropes in like his girlfriend, Grace Kelly.
Right.
Who is absolutely gorgeous, stunning in that film. My God, she was beautiful. And
that's why I recommend it. No.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
Oh, yeah, keep going back to watch it.
No, seriously. There's this great close-up where she comes in through the haze, and you can tell why Hitchcock made a close-up. I mean, what a face.
And sexually harassed her.
Yeah. All the actors are really up their games. They're just so good, and the plot is very interesting. And we all had that moment of looking at our neighbors, looking through the...
Speak for yourself, buddy.
Well, I wasn't there with binoculars, but you can walk down the street and you see somebody in their living room, and you make up stories about them. Oh, what is it that they do? What's their profession? Oh, I wonder. So, obviously, it takes it a bit further, but that's what I liked about the film. And I found like it's definitely one of the best by Hitchcock, in my opinion. I mean, there's great movies in the 50s by Hitchcock, North by Northwest, Vertigo, but that one is definitely my favorite.
I think it's such a great premise to begin with. It's the thing about it. It's like you say, it's very relatable, but it's also all the pieces for the drama are there right at the front. It's like he's vulnerable. He can't do anything, so you have that feeling of helplessness. You have the feeling also that if trouble comes past that window into his home, he's screwed because, he's injured. And you have the whole thing of trying to get people to understand what you're saying and believe you, and that level of helplessness. All of this is right there in the first sentence of the premise. All the building blocks are right there right away, and that's sort of really interesting.
Yeah.
And also he's doing something wrong by spying on his neighbors, so there's also like this sin that comes back to bite you in the butt, It's all there.
And in terms of just cinema, you know what I mean? It's a movie about watching and interpreting, and it's just like it plays so well and cleverly with that premise. It's like you're being led by the hand in terms of like, basically how to watch a movie in a way. And actually it's a movie that I guess I find like, if we're talking about these older movies, certainly there's a different pace to them.
Yeah.
And this one as well, but I think the pace really, really works. And just because it is a lot of waiting, it's a lot of watching, and, it lends itself to that feeling, so you don't miss the faster cuts that you might get, in the movies nowadays.
Yeah.
Well, I think what helps is, like you mentioned Grace Kelly as someone that really struck you in the movie, but like, Jimmy Stewart.
So likable.
He's so likable, but and his distress, his increasing level of panic and helplessness is almost palpable, and he's so entertaining to watch on that level. Because really, like, you're spending a lot of times watching just his face and like the fake sweat on his brow and all of that, but he's so convincing and, more to the point, so entertaining to watch as he's slowly losing his shit about this.
I know, and he's always like in his pajamas, and there he is with his broken leg. And I forget the woman that plays the nurse as well. Like, she's a bit the comic relief, but she's great playing with Jimmy Stewart. They have a good, how can I say, banter between them. So I really like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if we really have, because I've chosen a movie with Jimmy Stewart as well, and you can't really get away from him in the 50s is what it comes down to, But here's like a decorated fighter pilot, like he comes back, he is a Hollywood mega star, and, like, do we have anyone who's really can do a movie like this one where you're not doing too much that, we really want to just watch on a big screen? Like, do we have a star in that way? You know what I mean?
Maybe
like
George Clooney?
I was going to say George Clooney is the only one I could think of, because I was thinking
he feels
is
classic.
It the American or whatever it is?
Yeah.
Like where really you just watched him build a gun for most of the movie.
Yeah.
That's as close as I can get to like wanting to spend time with someone's face.
But you know what? We're mentioning like acting in the 50s. I think we need to mention Brando and James Dean, because they're the ones that really changed a lot of acting as we know it now. And you see it, they're right there in the 50s. On the Waterfront, it's not it's not that good of a movie, but Brando is just brilliant in it. He throws everything, just the convention of it, and just the natural way that he does the scene. The famous scene in the car where, I could have been a contender and the whole thing. And the director wanted him to be frightened when he sees the gun that his brother pulls, and he just looks at him going like, I'm disappointed, I'm embarrassed for both of us. Because he knows it's his brother, he knows his brother's never going to shoot him, and he's embarrassed. He starts the scene off that way, and it's brilliant. It's so natural, and that completely changed. It took a while, but that was something that changed the acting.
Oh, sure. No, Brando changed acting into a much more naturalistic type of performance. But it's interesting to note that, because that's not what Jimmy Stewart did in any of his movies.
He was great in it. Yeah. He was definitely a good actor as well, but it wasn't as natural, for sure. But that was not the style of acting that they would learn.
No, that's it.
No, you got the sense that Jimmy Stewart was saying a line, being well directed, and that's what you got. Whereas Brando, those were the lines that he kind of came up with on the spot.
Yeah, exactly. For sure.
Well, I think that back then the idea of watching a character wasn't as off-putting as it is today, and I was like, oh, I can see the construct. I hate that. But like back then, you're supposed to see the construct, and getting it back to Jimmy Stewart, the way he conveys the construct is what's interesting and what's compelling, as opposed to what Brando brought, where it's like, I don't see the construct anymore. I see a real human being.
Exactly. And there's the great scene with Brando on the waterfront where he's walking with the girl.
Like a complete backdoor recommendation.
I know, right? And then I keep trying to bring it back, and he's like, I won't have it. I won't have it.
Yeah, I know, but I just want to mention the scene.
I just want to mention one.
No, but there's this great scene.
Which movie?
Where he's sitting on the swing set with the girl. She dropped
Jimmy Stewart?
No, Brando.
George Clooney.
Follow along here. Come on. Stay with me. And she dropped the glove. He picks up the glove. And Jimmy Stewart would have probably handed the glove to her. Brando just keeps the glove in his hand. And then he puts on the glove. As if like he's just listening to her and kind of like playing with the glove. And it's something natural that...
Jimmy Stewart probably would have done whatever the director asked him to do.
Exactly. While Brando just did it. But it's an interesting thing to see this shift kind of starting to happen in the 1950s.
But I'm gonna take my my list now, and I'm gonna jump right into the Jimmy Stewart one to get that out of the way.
But is it Jimmy Stewart or Brando?
No, Brando.
You screwed the joke, because I was waiting for him to say it. I was like, but Brando, man.
Yeah, exactly. Because my first choice was actually On the Waterfront, but I guess I can't talk about it anymore.
I never recommended the film.
Over to you, Eric. So 1950 came out with Harvey. It's basically it's a film by Henry Koster. It's based on a play. That doesn't quite feel that way. At least it didn't to me when I watched it on PBS for the first time when I was a kid. And I've watched it since, and the movie just strikes me as like quite whimsical at times, but it's actually quite dark on several levels in an interesting way, possibly dealing with mental illness or possibly like an addiction of some sort as an allegory. Basically, this guy, played by Jimmy Stewart, is followed around by a 6-foot-tall rabbit that no one else can hear or see. And they're just best friends. The insistence that this rabbit is real eventually gets his family to put him into an insane asylum. Hijinks ensue. Love is found. The family comes closer together, and it sounds like such a strange premise and weird and farcical. And it's the type of movie that I'm almost surprised in my vision of what the 50s were. You've got the sci-fi stuff, and your robots and this and that, but like, this is just kind of a weird movie with like a strange premise right away that you're just supposed to buy. And it works really, really well, largely because of Jimmy Stewart. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I'd certainly...
I haven't. I mean, like, you gave the list, and I was like, oh, I should probably find a way to get that on my Netflix queue. And then I realized I'm not subscribed on Netflix. But I did see its remake, Donnie Darko, and...
Yeah. Yes, well... But yeah, no, if you can get your hands on it, for sure, watch it. It's not a hard one to track down, but it's a good one.
Yeah, well, it's a movie that makes it in a lot of lists of underrated classics and whatnot. It's a movie that sort of, because of its odd premise, I think probably skews away from the, AFI lists and all of that.
No, for sure. I don't think I ever would have watched it, if you know what I mean, like, had it not been just, like, one of those random PBS weekends, like, with the family, and it's just, like, and they showed it, and my mother had said, oh, I remember watching that, and, so we actually talked about the movie, and, so there's always that memory of it, and eventually, like, renting it on VHS years later, on my own, with my own pocket money, you know what I mean? Like, certainly I enjoyed it a lot. My next choice is obviously, again, skewing pretty closely to the type of thing I'll often recommend with these lists. But it's a 1951 film. Again, just like you can't get away from Jimmy Stewart, you can't get away from Hitchcock. So this is my Hitchcock movie. It's based on a novel written by Patricia Highsmith, which, if you haven't read it, certainly track that down. And it was basically, I think it was her second book as a young woman, and she sold it for like a ridiculously low amount of money. Like, and Hitchcock, being the evil genius he was, like, basically had like 6 or 7 different like people making the purchase so that she wouldn't ask for more money, so she never knew it was going to be a Hitchcock movie, and she never liked him after that. Is what it comes down to. Not that she liked very many people, but the premise of the book itself is 2 people randomly meet on a train, start talking, and each of them has a grievance in their life, largely based on one person. And obviously the discussion goes, the drinks are happening, like, wouldn't life be easier if I got rid of this person? Oh my god, you actually said it, I've been thinking it. Why don't we do this? You kill my person, I kill your person. No one will ever find us. And it's since then a trope that's been taken up several times in very different manners, and
Castle, the show Castle did.
But Castle rips off every detective
exactly.
story ever. Yeah. That's his shtick.
Yeah.
But this was the first time it was done on the big screen, and as an idea, certainly it kind of like haunts you a little bit, and it's kind of scary because it deals with like the anonymity of like public transportation in a way. Like, what if you were to just make a connection? What's the clue? There is none, and then basically you just...
It's the evil version of Before Sunrise.
Yeah, exactly. And then they get together 7 years later. And so obviously things don't go quite as well as you would think. One person can't go through it, the other one does, and things go out of control pretty quickly. But it's just a very good movie. The actors really pull it off. No real big names there, at least none that I really followed anywhere else, but certainly track it down. It's one of the lower scale like Hitchcock movies, certainly not a Rear Window or anything like that. But it's actually, the premise itself I found always kind of haunting.
I agree. Well, and that's the strength of the premise. Like, this one's based on a book, but it's funny because when you watch Hitchcock movies, allow me to talk about On the Waterfront. No, but I was thinking of Rope all of a sudden. Like, when you watch,
I was going to talk at length about Vertigo.
Oh, there you go. But you get the sense that Hitchcock spends an awful lot of time trying to...
Wait. Are you making fun of me?
Yes. But you get the sense that Hitchcock spends an awful lot of time trying to conceive the perfect murder.
Yes.
And then deconstructing it, and then seeing how he can mess it up. And of course, like, this is based on a book, so he didn't come up with that. But he must have fallen in love with that the minute he saw it. Oh, for sure.
If we could, if he had an internet, I'm sure he had like a constant search for, just like new ways to get away with murder. Like, this is like, and like he was constantly kind of like writing short stories and notes to himself, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, like you say, everything is in the premise in that one. It's a brilliant premise, and it's again, like you say, deals with the anonymity, but it also deals with just the idea of when you come close to a concept that does feel like this might be the perfect murder, there's something inherently creepy about it, because it's like, oh my god, people could get away with killing me and my loved ones just like that, you know? Of course, it would have worked then. I don't think it would work now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Especially since somebody would probably tweet there.
I'm coming for you. And then my last choice is, again, a classic of genre fiction. This time the Western, and it's High Noon with Gary Cooper and directed by Fred Zinnerman. It's actually one of my favorite movies. It's, again, quite simple in terms of premise. Beautiful in the black and white use here, just because you just get these perfect pictures of Gary Cooper as like an aging lawman, and he's brought this town together. Everyone's behind him, and you find out that people that from his past are coming into town, and everyone's scared, and everyone, person by person, basically just like leaves it. So there's a lot of talk in terms of, this movie being a parable to what was happening with McCarthyism at the time, and what was happening, especially in Hollywood, where certain directors weren't working with certain people because of, basically the Red Scare. And
a lot of during those times, a lot of artists, comedians, actors, directors, were blacklisted.
Flat out. Yeah, and this movie is kind of seen as one of the movies kind of like speaking about that issue. Just like science fiction might speak about social issues, in this case they're using the Western and getting away with it, in a way. And it's just really well done, but it's also a really good use of like the Western as the motif, where just like at the end of it, there is this showdown, and it's just like the premise isn't at the beginning, it's at the end, you're leading up to it, it's high noon, and you're just waiting for it to happen. And it's all the beats that it takes as you finally get there. It's a great, nicely put together movie.
One of the things about High Noon that I've always loved, and this is going to sound so stupid, but it's the title. I love the title High Noon because it's as if the movie was calling itself, there's a duel. Like, it's a Western duel. Like, it's calling itself that in that obvious a way, and yet not being nearly as clumsy and sort of almost crass about it.
Yeah.
I love that title.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And anyway, just as a side note, like, why High Noon? I guess is it the sun's not in either person's eyes at the point of it?
That's why, yeah.
Yeah, so... But I love that idea of just, like, it's not at dusk, it's not in the morning, it's, it's like really right in the middle of the day. In the middle of the town, usually. We're going to get together and we're going to have it off,
Interestingly, Richard Linklater's next Before movie is Before High Noon, so...
Oh yeah?
No, it's not.
Before High Noon. So my choices are basically a little bit genre specific, the way they usually are. You know what I mean? But and like you said, like maybe a bit darker.
Wait a minute.
So
is Harvey a genre, like mental illness movie?
Well, it's not that it's a genre, but it's almost fantastical in a way. You know what I mean? Like, it's certainly not a straight up drama.
I think it falls into the 50s version of what a fringe movie is, really.
Yep. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not sure really what the pulse of the 50s was. You know what I mean? But it's certainly one of those decades where they really tried to create a narrative about themselves.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned the Red Scare quite a few times, and I'm wondering if that perception I have that the 50s were not as daring in terms of self-criticism, if they were a lot more subtle about it, or a lot more heightened about it, and like like the heightened emotions, so that sort of takes over at first glance. And I wonder if it is not because they didn't want to be perceived as anti-government. You know what I mean?
It's possible, yeah.
At the same time, it's what the people are going through. Maybe they just wanted to escape and go watch a film and not think about everything that was going on in the world. Right? Remember in the 20s, like Shirley Temple was huge because there was a huge depression and people just wanted to go see like a cute little girl like dancing and oh my god, that's so cute.
But I mean, like in many levels, the 50s were actually a golden years for Hollywood. Well, for sure. For America, I should say. So, would there be that much of a need to sort of hide from the world in that period?
Which is why, I don't see it. You know what I mean? Like, but there's more of that disposable income. So it's not like you're just going to choose that one art movie. You know, it's almost like you'll try and go to several. You know, you'll maybe go 3-4 movies on a weekend. You know, who knows? And then McDonald's. You know, that just opened up. You know, so I think it's much more of a consumable period. You know, in terms of people just going out. You know. And I think that's really when it started, you know. So,
well, 1950s, it is Singing in the Rain, right?
Yeah.
It's those dance movies, those Gene Kelly, what was the other one? Fred Astaire.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's a whole side of the culture that I don't really know too much about. I've never been interested in that, you know. So,
well, I think we're going to talk more about it in the next episode because, spoiler people, there are musicals in Frank and I's picks, so we'll talk about that next time, because, hey, I just spoiled it. Next episode, in 2 weeks, we'll be revealing Frank's picks and mine and discussing them. In the meantime, if you have any questions, comments, you want to share with us your love of On the Waterfront, you can write us at mail@idiomatic.com or post a comment at idiomatic.com. We're also on Facebook, we're also on Twitter, we're also on iTunes. And if you could please like us on Facebook, we'd really appreciate it. It allows us to get the support to continue providing you with content on a regular basis. Thanks, and see ya.
Take care.